So I'm with my guest, Telaniel Boredman, creator
Hello.
of hello, creator of Un Undead Ed or UndeadEd.
You can pronounce it whatever you want. I do say undeaded when I say it, but just because I tend to contract words.
hmm uh, Apocalyptic Horseplay and
That one's a
Blacksmith.
tricky. It's hard to contract that one.
Yeah,
No tongue twister.
yeah. So my first questions are going to be about your childhood. Like, when did you start drawing? What was the first things you started drawing, and why
Uh,
comics?
okay, well that's an easy one. I was 5 when I said like drawing. I mean, we all start drawing early on, but I did start doing it consistently around 5. And the thing I started drawing the most was the mask from the
Oh,
cartoon adaptation of the movie of the same name. And I was obsessed with that design, and I drew it constantly. It was years before I found out it was inspired by a comic book, which I did not read until I was full-on teenager. But yeah, I was very obsessed with that design, and I copied it, and I redesigned it over and over again. And I have books, boxes of books filled with that character.
nice. And then, and that's, is that why you got into comics was once you discovered the comic book, or did you always just want to tell stories?
Yeah, a bit of column A, bit of column B. I mean, I was enjoying the process. So of course, when you enjoy doing something, why would you stop?
Yeah.
And I was very early on aware that this was a profession because my father was an avid comic book collector.
Oh, okay.
He had a huge library which I was not allowed to read and did anyway because what's he gonna do? So yeah, I read comic books from an early age, and I was very interested by the idea of making that my profession because people ask you at a very young age, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And
Mhm.
I just looked around, pick a comic books, I'll do that. That sounds good.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's pretty much how I decided that was gonna be my career, for lack of a better suggestion from anybody. But I guess yeah, telling stories was the real thing because I could have moved on from that into movies. There was a long
Mhm.
time in which I was considering becoming a filmmaker, and I wrote books like completely pictureless books a couple times, and really enjoyed that process too. So I think it boils down to telling stories. I think I really enjoy telling stories, and comic books was a very fun way to do it.
Yeah, it is. Uh, so what titles did you tend to read most from your father's collection?
Well, I don't know if you'd be familiar with them, but I was a big fan of Gottlieb. It's a French author from the mid 50s, and he was very influential in comic book magazines, which were big back then. And he had a very interesting style that was very hard to match, and which also allowed him to match any other style at the time. So he would revamp every existing franchise that there was, and I found that to be like a superpower. It was like Mystique from X-Men. He could do anything and be better at anyone's thing, and I really got inspired by him. In terms
Nice.
of storytelling, well, it was mostly comedies, so I guess that's why I got into strip comics very early on. Like my father, he had the Garfield books.
Yeah,
He had Calvin and Hobbes. He had a lot of those like really essential uh, classics. So
nice.
in terms of humor, I really got into that very early on.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I notice is like is like the one of the prevailing things in your stories besides the theme of making choices and that determines your fate.
Yeah, I guess humor makes the medicine go down. I have a lot of heavy subjects I like to play with,
Mhm.
and I found that I don't enjoy getting to the dark stuff if there's not a bit of levity to it.
Yeah.
Because the magical thing about humor is that you can laugh about everything and
hmm
anything. Doesn't mean you should, but you can. So I
Yeah.
do try to inject as much humor as I can to talk about death, grief, violence, abuse, all kind of things that
Mhm.
would be otherwise pretty unpalatable.
Yeah, so I got uh your story that you had did on DeviantArt, right? For
Yeah.
And this
Yeah,
was your
that's why I
first.
started web comics. Was DeviantArt. It was my first platform when I was just getting started with internet anything.
Yeah. So, I know you published on Webtoons, your series. Was there not a big selection of publishers you could take your stories to in Belgium?
They were, and they were not interested in what I had to sell. I did a
Uh,
lot of searching before I landed on Webtoon. For 2 years, I went door to door, so to speak, from publisher to publisher. And I got some very positive feedback, but never any actual contracts. And
oh,
at the time, UndeadEd was kind of a way to kill time. Like it was
hmm
a side project I had just pretty much to stay busy. And I
hmm
did not actually plan on making that publishable. That's why it's such a weird format. And thank God
hmm
YouTube had this, YouTube, sorry, Webtoon had this very specific format they were testing at the time, where it was called SlideToon,
hmm
which really allowed the experience of a strip comic where you only get to see one panel at a time. And without that, I'm not sure it would have translated into the scroll format that they had going on. So it really wasn't intended to be published anywhere, neither as a book or as a webtoon or as anything. It was just to kill time.
Nice. And you work traditionally majority of the time and then
I do.
translate, do the colors in what software do you use for
Photoshop. Yeah, I do
Photoshop?
all
Yeah.
my colors digitally, but everything starts with paper and pen.
Nice. And do you want to talk a little bit about this story while I scroll through it?
The one you're displaying right now, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was my first consistent web comic. I did a lot of web strips, just like UndeadEd, like short jokes, couple panels at a time. And after a while, when I decided to try to develop a longer story, I entered into this original character tournament that was on DeviantArt, and entered with one of my characters. Basically, the concept of a original character tournament was to just make comics about your character interacting with other characters from other creators into a larger story that someone else was writing at the time. So mine was a former serial killer that was incarcerated in an insane asylum, the insane asylum being the place where all the characters meet. And
hmm
like most of the other character, he was just either a runaway patient or a locked up individual. And they all try to survive this weird night where some supernatural entity breaks loose as well and try to control people. So I liked the exercise because at the time I was studying comic books in school. I was studying in an art school in Belgium, specifically comic books. So I figured, on top of all the assignments I was already being given, I was trying to do something that was really much more for me, because the assignments were very classical. Work on
Yeah.
perspective, work on proportion, body anatomy, colors, techniques,
hmm
and I wanted to do knives and city faces. So I also started doing that pretty compulsively, and it was a contest. So my character was in the run-in for nearly all the way to the end. Didn't
Okay.
actually make it to the finale, but I wrote the finale, and at the very end, I had an entire story. So I figured that'll be a book, which I self-published. It's available online. It's called The
Oh,
Ripper.
nice.
And I figured if I can finish one comic book just for funsies, I can definitely make another one for reals.
hmm
So that was a good stepping stone into the process of web comics, which at the time I also didn't realize was a much different way to engage with your readership, because on web comics you are directly connecting with people who give you feedback page after page, instead of
Yeah.
waiting for the entire thing to be done and published and get feedback in magazines or something. And that's the way I always pictured my career to go. I was expecting to post maybe a book every 2 years max and get
Mhm.
some feedbacks and conventions. That was way more galvanizing, to get to interact with my readers and see the way they would react to every twist and turn of the story, to listen to their theories, to see what would make them react the most, what engaged them the most, which character they like best.
Yeah. And I know like
If
with
I'm honest with myself, a lot of characters stayed alive because they were engaging.
Yeah. I know on Apocalyptic Horseplay, a lot of people like the Pesty or
Yeah,
Pestilence.
a lot of people did.
Yeah,
He's my favorite too, so I don't blame them.
my favorite was Marvin.
Really, I
Yeah,
think you're the first one who actually. No, there was another girl who really liked Marvin, and she did a cosplay of that character. I
nice.
don't know if you remember those. I posted some of the pictures alongside the comic for a bonus episode, and they were really impressive pictures. I love that
So
cosplay she made of Marvin.
nice. I'll have to check that out again. It's been a few years since I've seen that.
It's been like 5 years at least since the comic
Yeah.
ended. So yeah, it's getting old now.
Yeah, right. It ended right at like 2020.
Yeah,
So I
just
remember,
around the time. I really did not expect to tie my story with an actual pandemic, but it really worked well.
yeah, and then I'm gonna pull up your Instagram so people can see the other work you do.
The modern stuff.
Yeah, working on Blacksmith, which is
Hmm.
a pirate story. So,
Yeah,
what is your goal in the long run? Do you have many series that you want to eventually get to, or
I
do you?
do. Yeah, I do have a lot of stories I want to tell. Not all of them are finished and ready to go at all. They're mostly ideas and topics I would like to get to. Some of them I want to get to as soon as Blacksmith wraps up. So those might be next if I get anyone interested in them. Some others might be years down the road, and I need to have enough to say about them. Some topics I really have to research a long time before I feel
Mm,
like I can talk about them. And some others, like pirates, I've just been into pirates since I was a child, so that came very organically.
yeah, and I notice a lot of your stories have like a supernatural element. Is that going to be a prevailing theme throughout your
Yeah.
stories?
I really, if I'm honest, I really don't see myself telling a story where nothing supernatural happens. I mean, it might not be like the dominant thing about every single one of my stories, but it's gonna be something in there every single time.
Yeah.
I always have to mess with reality just a little bit.
And then you have a very distinct style. How did that develop over time?
I'm not sure. I mean, it still looks different to me every 5 years or so. I think
Mm,
like everybody else. I just consume a lot of things that end up becoming little pieces of my style. And what I think that actually that what you're showing right now, that's not my work. That's someone
uh,
else's work. But I am very happy with it. So yeah, my style, I feel like it's very singular in the sense that it's mixing traditional American comic book
mhm,
symbolism and some really European Franco-Belgium effects from other comic books that I've read in France. And I think I've managed to merge the two in a way where neither can be really dominant. And like
yeah,
I use a lot of little tricks and codes I've picked up here and there that aren't supposed to mesh, but I make them work.
yeah. It's very successful. And did you ever imagine your comics would be so successful, or was
No,
that?
no, not at all. My goal always has been and always will be to just earn enough so that I get to do it.
Hmm.
I've never planned on anything beyond that, and I don't really care about anything beyond that. Like, I'm
Hmm.
very excited that there are plans to make animated series of my work. I'm always incredibly excited about making books that
Hmm.
people can buy and own. But at the end of the day, all I care about is to make enough money so that I get to do that with my day. That's all I've ever wanted.
And do you work full time in comics, or do you still have to have like part-time work or?
No, I've been fortunate enough to work full time for the past almost 10 years now. I think it was
Nice.
sometime after UndeadEd and right before Apocalyptic Horseplay, where my wife and I moved in together, and by pulling our income together, we were able to both just keep doing what we were doing without taking any side work on the side. So we stopped doing it. She's also an artist and she was also working freelance, and we managed to stop doing most of our freelance work and focus on our projects, which has been really fulfilling.
That's cool. And you also have a little tyke now.
Yeah, we have a little girl, 4.5 years old.
Yep.
Another project of ours that we are really happy to commit to.
And so, I know like in America, the economy is kind of, a lot of people do have to have multiple jobs, but
That's
the
what I hear.
economy's pretty good there, or you said same there?
Well, it's fine. I mean, at the moment, there's no fires in the streets, so I'm guessing that's good.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
good.
I'm not saying that we're swimming in it or anything, but we get by.
That's good. And is your daughter artistic too, or is she...
No, as proud as I am about everything she does, drawing is not her thing. She's
Mm,
she's very willing to try, and sometimes she sits at my desk and offer to help me. But as far as I can tell, there's no real. She doesn't enjoy it any more than she would enjoy sorting her snail shell that she collects or playing with her dog. That's just a hobby like every kid her age. They just like to doodle and move on.
yeah.
Maybe someday she'll get the,
Hmm,
the the drawing bug, and I'll be very happy to guide her on the path. But so far, she enjoys everything equally.
nice. That's good. And then I let's talk a little bit about what type of themes you like to put into your stories. So we already mentioned the one, particularly to like apocalyptic horseplay, where there was the set, uh, like fate had one plan, but it kind of talks about how in the end it's about the choices you make.
Hmm.
And so, what other themes do you like to bring into your stories? I know you mentioned you use humor to help the medicine go down, and you
Yeah,
talk.
well, I find that it's very interesting to talk about suffering through characters because each character pretty much embodies a different sort of suffering. It's not the theme I enjoy the most, but it does drive the plot forward. So usually that's what I try to do justice to. Uh, the topics, really, I have no particularly favorite topic. I do like to talk about death, but
Hmm.
that also goes hand in hand with supernatural. Like they just tend to work well together.
Yeah.
But yeah, grief is a big one. I often like to work towards the outcome of a story by following the 5 stages of grief. I find
Oh,
like
okay.
it's a good mental process towards any resolution, and I
Hmm.
don't stick to it really faithfully, but I do get inspired by it often. Destiny was a big one because for a very long time I was struggling with a lot of stories that had any kind of prophecy in them.
Yeah.
As a writer and as a reader, I often found myself struggling with the concept of a prophecy because it took the fun out of things to know what's going to happen, even if it fulfills itself or is thwarted by the action of the characters. This kind of preview to the future I always found diminishing because it stifles the imagination of the reader
Hmm.
who is supposed to predict what's going to come next. Like
Yeah.
that's the most joyful experience when reading something is to try to guess or try to see where the plot is getting. And a prophecy is a way to say this is where we're heading. That this is the destination. Just don't get sidetracked. Just focus on that.
It's
I don't
like,
know. I always found that diminishing.
yeah, it's why prequels, I don't think prequels work very well, is because you already kind of know the
Yeah.
outcome of like,
Exactly. Plus, you get excited about the wrong thing in the prequel. You're like, oh, that's how that thing's gonna become this thing.
hmm
Yeah, well, that's as exciting as it's gonna get. No, nothing's new is gonna happen. Nothing's gonna surprise you. If they do surprise you, they're still gonna fall right back into place afterwards. It's always been a little sad for me to see a lot of stories descend into this destiny bullcrap. I'm gonna keep using
yeah.
the word crap, not to swear. I don't know if it's okay to swear on your channel. You tell
Oh,
me.
it's fine. Um, I guess as long as you don't go too out off the rails, it's fine.
I don't swear a lot, but since it is a second language, sometimes I can use a language that some other people would find much more
Hmm.
shocking than I do.
Yeah. And then with the crowdfunding, how did that work for you? Did you have distributors lined up, or did you distribute the books yourself?
Well, I was planning to do it myself, and even as I say that, I'm getting overwhelmed by the idea of me doing that myself. I was kind of desperate. Like I really wanted this to be turned into a book, not originally, but after a lot of readers suggested it, I found myself thinking that'd be really fun to have a book made of this comic, which is finished, which is ready to go. And at the time, my editor on Webtoon, whose name is David, used to tell me, you just hang in there. We're working towards bringing a lot of Webtoons into print. We have a lot of projects in the works. We have to acquire some company who can do it. Just wait in there, wait in there. And I was more than willing to wait, of course, but 6 years went by
Wow.
and nothing came of it. And I found myself running out of patience. So my first instinct was I can't sell the IP to anybody because Webtoon has a pre-written engagement towards this IP, so I can't exactly sell the rights to anybody, but I did have the personal right to the print. So I figured I can publish it myself, as I have before, but in a larger scale, which would involve crowdfunding, which would involve a lot of logistics. And I looked into it and I got overwhelmed and then I get motivated again. It was a long process until I met Tom Akel at a convention in Baltimore. And he's the CEO of Rocketship, who has specialized in bringing a lot of webtoon to print.
Oh, wow.
So when he saw my work and he heard that I was interested in printing, he offered me to go through his services. And I said, you know what, we'll give it a go. I have never tried that before, and I don't feel like I can actually run a Kickstarter by myself.
Hmm.
And it went swimmingly. It really went very well. It took a lot longer than I had expected, with an entire studio involved, which really makes me rethink how I would have managed by myself.
Yeah.
Thank God I didn't try that. And in the end, the book was beautiful. All the rewards were great. I'm very happy with the way it came out. There was a lot of like little effects that we did for the limited edition booklet. There was a lot of rewards that turned out better than I expected.
Oh,
There was a lot going well, and that's why I decided to do the same thing again for Apocalyptic Horseplay. That one I still have to finish because there's no actual, I don't know how you say it, maquette. There's no actual model of the way the book's gonna look.
okay.
Obviously, I have all the pages finished. I just need
Hmm.
to put them together, resize the cover, make some of the reward designs a little better, and send it all to the printer.
Hmm.
And hopefully it'll go well again.
Yeah. And then with that one, I remember you showing your pages, and you do it in the comic book layout page
Yeah,
first, and then you chop it up for
yeah, exactly.
webtoons.
I've always worked like that because I started working for print. So when you work for print, you have to think about the way people are gonna, digest your work. So I used to design my pages in a way that they would look good uh, side by side in a book. And when Webtoon signed me up for longer stories with Apocalyptic Horseplay, I kept going because it was just faster for me to keep going the way I was doing rather than learn a whole new format, which in hindsight I should have done because it's a huge time saver to go full digital and to focus on the scroll format one panel at a time, rather than the way I do it, where I have to make them fit together on a already restraining format, which is the usual A4, A3 format that comic books have in here. And I'm just used to it. It's not by choice as much as it is by the lack of will to change. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone who wants to get into Webtoon. Definitely not.
And but it probably made the transition to going to book format a little bit easier.
That was the upside. Yeah, all the pages are ready to go, and they will look actually, at least for me, they will look better in book format because some of the panels will complement each other in a way that they couldn't on a Webtoon scroll format.
Now, do you handwrite your dialogue
I used
in?
to.
Okay, so you,
I used to take a lot of pleasure in handwriting, but that's another issue that I had once I moved into Webtoon. is that the size of the font when it's handwritten on the paper will look either dramatically small or much too big once you size the panel accordingly on a scroll format. So I
Yeah.
had to stop and go digital because it was just simpler. Not to mention, again, English is the second language, and I did so many typos. And on a weekly schedule, you don't have time to proof every single text. So I would make too many typos, and fixing it when it's handwritten is a bitch. It's a bitch and a
Yeah.
half. So
So
again, I would not recommend that either.
how many pages do you make per week? Are you
Two.
on two? Okay.
Yeah, that's the minimum. For Apocalyptic Horseplay, they used to be seven panels each on average. For Blacksmith, now we are on about 10.
Oh, okay. And has that stayed consistent from uh your weekly output? Has that stayed consistent between Apocalyptic Horseplay and uh Blacksmith or
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I mean, I struggled at the beginning. The panel count is one of the first things that I had to
Mhm.
negotiate when we signed the agreement. And the seven panel was not going to cut it anymore because they were having a lot of reshaping the quotas that they were asking for artists. And even though those are negotiable, like people don't hear that enough, but you can negotiate your quotas. They don't encourage it, but you can and you should, because otherwise they'll squeeze you for everything you've got. If they
Yeah.
can get you to do 80 panels a week and you don't negotiate, they're not going to give you a smaller number. But
Mhm.
you can talk them down to 40 panels, 20 panels, and that's where I landed, 20 panels a week. Again, because I was a father at that time and I knew I wasn't going to be able to keep
Yeah.
going the way I was doing. I had to take days off. I had to take breaks much more often.
Mhm.
So I did decide to stick to a weekly schedule because that's the way Webtoon works. I couldn't really see myself doing anything differently. But the count was kind of an adjustment. For particularly Horseplay, there were a lot less colors as well, so that was another struggle. It's a pirate
Yeah.
story, Blacksmith. I could not go with the same kind of desaturated atmospheres that I had going for UndeadEd and Apocalyptic Horseplay. I needed something really colorful and kind of zany.
Yeah.
So that took a lot of time as well. And mostly I have to give credit to my wife for helping me juggle, fatherhood and work at the beginning. But now I feel like it's working better. I know how much time each steps of the process can take.
Yeah.
I have an understanding daughter who knows not to come knocking when I'm working,
That's
and
good.
and I had an assistant for the longest time who really helped me keep the schedule going. So it was an adjustment, and I wouldn't say it went the same way on my previous series and this one, but pretty much I have the same way to work around the problems.
Nice. And what size paper are you working on?
Well, for Apocalyptic Horseplay, it was a weird format. I don't remember exactly the measurements. It was in centimeters. It was like something like 36 by 42, something like that. Anyway, it was an interesting format for me to work because I really could dominate the page, but it made each panel a little too small for my
Mm.
taste. So now for Blacksmith, I work on an A2 format, which is this big.
Oh wow.
That's
Nice.
the size of a page. And it's too big to put in the scanner, so I have to divide those afterwards. So again, kids, don't do it. Don't work like me. The traditional process is a sucker's game. You won't be able to get out of it, and it is way more time consuming. You have to buy markers. You have to erase with an actual eraser, which leaves little crumbs everywhere. It's not fun.
Though I have some comic artists that I've interviewed that they work traditionally because they sell the originals afterwards.
That is a good side, but it's not worth the hassle. But yeah, you can sell the originals, and those make you a lot of money if you manage to do it.
Yeah. And then I know like on your Instagram you sometimes post pictures of like your Halloween costumes. You make them or
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I used to do cosplay before I started doing comic books. Not professionally, again, it was like one of my many hobbies. But yeah, I was big into cosplay for a long time, and now Halloween is the only time where I have an actual reason to get back at it. So I make a lot of the costumes myself, and I really enjoy it every year.
do you have one lined up this year
Yeah,
already,
I'm
or
doing the Hatbox Ghost from the Haunted Mansion.
nice? I'm gonna do the Fly from the original movie.
Fly? Oh,
Yep.
that is an ambitious one.
All right. Well, I was gonna do the cheap.
Brilliant. Good one. Very good
Yeah,
one.
but yeah, some fun stuff. And then back to the comics. So you use the are those Faber-Castell pens that you use for your inking, or do you ever use like the India inks and a brush, or
Well, I did for a while, but it was very messy. I guess my hands shake a little. Like I
mm,
don't know if that's a normal thing, but I have a very hard time maintaining a steady grip. So I use markers which are usually very flexible and don't drool or drip or anything like that. Like
yeah,
I try to keep my station as clean as possible, and I feel like
mhm,
the traditional, inking tools usually make a mess in my hands at least. But they do give
yeah,
better results. Like I don't discourage anyone from trying to work with those because they really make a big difference. I try to stay as close to that effect, to that rendition as possible without actually using the proper tools.
yeah. My last interview I did with the brush inker, and he supports his hand with his other hand. That might help, but
Yeah, maybe that's what it takes. I should have tried that.
but
I should try to get
uh
a hand assistant to hold my hand. That'd be very helpful, and I would feel less lonely.
yeah, that's one thing I've heard is comics can be a very lonely thing, but your wife is into
Well,
art too, so that probably
for the longest
helps.
time, I had a very, very faithful assistant, which was my cat, but he passed away last
Oh,
January. So now it is officially very lonely. But for the longest time, it was just right. Me and my little BJ on my lap, purring the whole time. That was the dream.
yeah, my condolences.
Thank you.
And I remember the question I was going to ask because UndeadEd and Apocalyptic Horseplay were tied together with
Hmm.
was that your original intention when you started making Apocalyptic
No,
Horseplay? Was it
no, it
just
wasn't intentional. I mean, it was those were two separate stories I wanted to tell for a very long time. Apocalyptic Horseplay actually predates Undead Ed, and like I said, Undead Ed was a way to stay busy, so that wasn't actually intended to become anything else. And when I finished it, literally the last month that the series was running, the numbers went through the roof, and my editor got in touch and asked me if there was any way to keep the story going.
oh,
But
okay.
spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't read the comic, the character dies at the end. I mean, he
Hmm.
started off dead and he just ends up being dead. So there was no real way to change the ending unless I went to completely turn around the story, which I was not willing to do because again, we were like weeks from the end, which was like three
Yeah.
episodes, I think, at the time. So there was no way to do that organically or, in any way that made sense. So I decided, well, I'm not going to keep that story going, but I like some of these characters, which are still alive, and I might inject them into the next stories because there's no reason those two worlds couldn't merge. So I tried that. At the beginning, it was very discreet. Those characters weren't big into the plot, and more they took an importance, and people just really enjoyed moving on from one story to the next with some knowledge of the background references, and that just kept making the story better. So at the very end, I decided, okay, let's bring Ed back in there. Let's
Mm.
have him do a wave for his former readers, and yeah, that went well. I'm not gonna keep that going. Some people still ask if that Ediverse is gonna keep expanding. I don't think so. I mean, I could. Again, there's a lot of things about that world that I could expand on. So if that's the only thing I can think of doing, I probably will. But I have other things I want to get to, and they just wouldn't mesh properly.
Yeah, that makes sense. Uh, so I do see like in like UndeadEd there was the there's a cat that's appears every now and then. Is that kind of a homage to your cat that you had, or?
Yeah, yeah, that was very much him. I mean, he didn't look like that, although he was black, but he was
Mm.
a lot furrier. With like a big plush pillow. But the fact that the cat stays in the background to me was an homage to the fact that my cat was always in the background of every comic I've made since 2008, I think.
Yeah.
Like he was either on my shoulder or on my lap, so I figured I'll put you in there. You want to be in there so bad, I'll put you in there. I'll squeeze you in there.
I remember you shared the apocalyptic horseplay, like the beginnings of it, where it
Mhm.
was them planning out the end of the world, and
The
then
actual
it.
apocalypse. Yeah, that was the original comic. The one I think is from 2012,
Yeah,
2013, something like that. So that's what I mean.
yeah,
That's what I mean by saying it predates UndeadEd, that the characters really were around in my little sketchbooks for a long time. I just didn't have a story until much later. Like I like the concept of the horsemen. I like the idea of them living in modern times, having modern outfits, but I didn't know what they would uh, do besides plot or demise. It was only after a while that I got this idea that what if they don't want to do their job anymore? They could get sick of it. I mean, we all do
yeah,
sometimes, and that really got the whole story uh, coming much more organically. The idea of the horsemen trying not to do the one thing that they're known to do. That
yeah.
was really funny to me.
Family picture.
There she is. Well, she does not look like that anymore. Oh, she was so tiny then.
Now, did you want to talk about any of these illustrations? And that's BJ, your cat?
No, that's the other one. I have two cats. This
Oh,
is Momo.
Momo.
That one was my BJ's cat. My cat had a cat
Mm.
because that one does not hang out with me. That one only used to hang out with him. When he
Uh,
was on my lap, he was cuddling up with this one. And now that he's gone, this one is just living his life. He has a garden, he has a little kitty door. He just comes and goes whenever he's hungry.
nice. This was
That was
for
the flag design. I was really unsure about what I wanted to go with, and I just ask people what they thought, and the response were pretty directed towards one particular design, so I went with that one.
okay. And was it the one that was uh
And
this one?
just when I said that he never comes to see me, that's when he comes to see me, just to prove
Yeah,
me wrong.
yeah, he heard you.
That one's a fan art from for one of my friends' comic book that came out, I think 5 years ago now, no, 6 years ago. That one's
Okay.
a French comic book. It's called Le Culte de Mars. And it's about this post-apocalyptic world where humans have actually gone to live on Mars, but not everybody could afford the trip, so a lot of people stayed behind, and from generation to generation forgot exactly what society used to be like, and just worship Mars almost culturally. Like they are convinced that their saviors is in the stars, living on Mars, that people went there and will come back to get them soon enough. And there's this one guy, the main character, who travels the world trying to actually gather the knowledge of the old times to kind of recreate society. So he's trying to
Oh,
pull in knowledge that now only exists in people's cultures from ear to mouth, mouse to ear, sorry, and he's trying to make a book called the Encyclopedia of Forgotten Knowledge.
nice.
And it's only when people realize the potential of that book that things really start to go wrong. And it's a
Yeah.
great story. It's just one big book. I think my friend is called Moby Dick. It took her 3 years to
Oh
write and
wow.
draw this book, and I really recommend it. It's very good.
Sounds really good. And
I'm not sure
then
it's been translated in English yet, but it does exist in French, German, and Netherlands.
so in your community, do you have comic friends, or is it mostly online friends that you have that are into comics?
I used to have mostly online friends, but when I went to study comic books in university, that's when I made some real life artist friends, and now those are the people I see the most. Like we just stayed in touch through our to the beginning of our respective careers.
That's
We
nice.
don't do the same things at all. Like one of my friend only does color, is a colorist.
Okay.
Another one of my friends doesn't do comic books, he's more of an illustrator. I have some friends who went to tattoo design, and some people like Moby Dick who do actual comic books from writing, drawing, coloring, everything by themselves. But we do stay in touch to just compare notes. Yeah, that one's my costume from 2014, I think.
Nice.
And back then I still was doing cosplay conventions, so I used to do a
Nice.
little catwalk on stage to show off my Halloween costumes.
And did you do mostly local shows, or did you go to other country shows, or?
Well, no, I mean, I don't have a car and I don't really travel all that much. So mostly I did conventions in Belgium and France. I didn't actually go much beyond that.
Mm, until Baltimore, right? You were invited to that one?
No, that one I actually went as an attendant and managed to kill two birds with one stone.
On the animation you mentioned, so is that still in like the preliminary stages of concepting, or do you know
No,
what's
it's very, very it's very much still in writing. Like it's nothing really exists beyond that. What they're trying to do right now is to I forgot the name. They're writing the pitch and the Bible for what the series might look like. So it's
right?
mostly going to be the project in a very a digest of the entire project that they are going to then pitch to actual investors, and it might not get funded. So it's not actually a sure deal, but it is on its way, and hopefully things will work out.
Now, if it does get picked up, are you going to try to stay in the loop of like making sure your work is presented in the best way, or do you think you'll
Well,
have that opportunity?
I will obviously make myself available for as a consultant. I will help any way I can. But the thing that I really I feel like people don't maybe realize that it's not going to be my story anymore. Like someone is offering to buy the rights to make their own adaptation,
Mm,
and they're very much looking to do something different. It's not going to be so different that I should be offended, but I think it's going to be different from what I wanted to say in my story, which is really fine because I did tell my story the way I wanted to tell it, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing someone else have a crack at those characters. So some people are already making comments about the pitch that has been published, saying that it seems very different from the concept of the comic book, which it is. And it's too early to tell whether or not I'm going to enjoy it, but I do welcome that. I don't think it should be so faithful to the source material that it's just a retelling of my comic book, but this time the pictures move. I
yeah,
think it's interesting whenever you do an adaptation of something to just change one aspect to it, because otherwise you're pretty much, I feel, mimicking another person's performance, which is always going to be hard in comparison to the original work. Like you want to do
yeah,
something a little different just so it adds something. At
yeah,
least I find it perfectly acceptable to do that.
yeah. I could see how that could, what you
I
mean
mean,
by that,
personally, I
because
wouldn't want to tell someone else's story again. So I think it's always more interesting to make it your own.
I think that's part of the pitfall of doing like remakes and stuff is sometimes
Mhm.
they either go too faithful or off the
Exactly.
rails.
If you
And
found value in the original idea, you should try to maintain that value to
yeah,
preserve it. But that doesn't mean the original idea has to be completely impeachable.
yeah, that's everything that I have for you today. But is there anything you want to sign off with, or oh, actually, let me show. Will it automatically change your current series? Did it
Mhm.
change over?
Well,
So,
I will make a disclaimer that the we're now entering the mid-season hiatus for this series, so it's going to be on pause for the next months or two. And after that, it's going to be the second half of the last season. So this series is heading towards the ending, which is a good time to get on board because you might get a lot more out of it in a lot less time. So I encourage people who want to give it a try and who like pirates to give it a read. You have a lot of catch up to do, but you have time to do it.
And how long do you usually do your hiatuses? I remember when you were doing Apocalyptic Horseplay, you mentioned that you usually don't like to take a day off because your dad instilled in you a ethic of showing up even when you're sick, but you had something going on that was.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I do take hiatuses consistently, but those are mostly either to recover from an illness, to make actual like a move or something. But these days I do take longer hiatuses than I did before because now Webtoon has this fast pass system, which means that whenever I return from a hiatus, I need to have a minimum of two fast pass episodes. So I have to make time for whatever is going on and then make a buffer on top of that. So it kind of increases the length of my hiatuses just because once I return, I need to have a buffer and an extra buffer, which I do build ahead of time in case my daughter gets the flu or for holidays, stuff like that. So now the hiatuses usually last a month or two,
Okay.
often more than one, whereas before it was just a couple of weeks max,
Hmm.
which does come at a cost. I mean, I realize people who read web comics on a weekly basis, if they're left out to dry too long, they do move on. I do find myself returning to less and less readers every time that this happens, and it's just the way of the internet. People are fickle.
Yeah. And then I did notice that your other series, Apocalyptic Horseplay and UndeadEd, are the full series is available. And I know like Webtoon sometimes locks the series. Was that your own wish that the series to remain available, or is it just going through again because of the Kickstarters and stuff to get people on board?
Well, they do have the right to maintain them on their website for a long time. What changes after a certain period is that I get the rights to publish it online elsewhere. So UndeadEd now I can publish whenever. Apocalyptic Horseplay, I think it needs a couple years more, but I will be able to publish it elsewhere as well. But I do leave it on Webtoon because that's where they were first published, and I don't have a problem with that. There are some plans to monetize the completed series on Webtoon. A lot of series get some kind of plan where they become accessible only once a day, I think, and then you have to pay for the
That's what I
extra access.
I meant because
I
I
haven't been
noticed.
approached. Yeah, I haven't been approached to do any of that. That's why I'm not very familiar with it. But if
Mm,
I was offered, I might refuse because I don't actually need to keep making money off of those. I did while I was making them, and now I'm making books of them. So that's the extent of the exploitation I want to do. And because I want those series to be accessible, like they are not exactly something I want to keep exploiting, and I do want them to be accessible in book format and on Webtoon. So as much as I can help it, I'll probably leave them up. And if at some point Webtoon wants to take them down, which they are allowed to, I will publish them elsewhere.
yeah, which I think is a good plan because then you have the opportunity of more people being able to access your stories and
Yeah.
then eventually buy the books because some people are rereaders, you know. I don't.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, a lot of people discover my work sometimes years after I made it, and those usually seek out more stories. So it's really the best way to gain new readers even years after the fact.
And do you still read comics regularly, or are you uh too busy with work that you don't always get a chance to
That's
read?
a good question. That's a good question because it does become a challenge after a few years of the Webtoon weekly schedule. I make a lot of time for my family. I make a lot of time for exercise, for activities, for socializing. I don't make a lot of time for reading. The time I allocate for that is the half hour before I fall asleep. And more often than not, I wake up with a book on my face. So I will admit that reading has become a bit of a challenge, but I do have a pile of books on my nightstand. And even though it very slowly diminishes, I do go through them. At least I try to.
And are they mostly comics, or do you do prose reading too?
I find like I have a way of going through 3 comic books before I return to an actual book, and then I'll go back to comic books. In ratio, it is definitely 2/3 comic books, but I do like books still.
Yeah, same here. Well, I will bid you adieu. It was very nice talking to you. And I
Same
know
here.
you have
Thank
to
you
go
very much
pick
for
up
having me.
your child. What's her name?
Yeah, she'll
Or
be
do you...
waiting soon enough. I'll get to it.
But you're always welcome back if you want to come back for another interview or just to hang out at any time.
Well,
But
I'm very sad to say I haven't had the time to listen to your previous interviews yet, but I will certainly, because I am always looking for something to listen to while I work.
mhm.
So yeah, maybe some other time I'd be happy to come back on.
Yeah, the first three were from, they also have a live stream that they do together called
Mm-hmm.
Graybeard Studio, and they pick a topic and then they draw it. And
And they draw while you do the interview. That's cool.
so they didn't draw during the interview, but their shows is a draw stream.
Ah, okay.
So I highly recommend it if you ever get a chance to watch it. It's funny.
Sure. Yeah, I would love to see that.
But all right, I'll talk to you later, or
Have a nice day.
possibly. You have a good one. Bye.
Bye.